Stop scrolling right now. What if I told you the Vatican conducted the most successful psychological
In nomine
warfare
Patris et
experiment
Filii
in
et
human
Spiritus
history?
Sancti.
Not through armies,
Pax
not
vobiscum.
through politics, through something far more powerful, making Catholicism so psychologically irresistible that Protestant
This is a
Europe
most noble
almost
endeavor,
voluntarily
gentlemen.
converted back.
The grace in
This
this
is
figure
Rome
is
in
divine. Thank you,
1650.
Father.
And what the Pope created here was so psychologically overwhelming that it nearly reversed the Protestant Reformation through pure mind control. Here's what nobody tells you. The Vatican's Counter-Reformation wasn't just religious reform. It was systematic psychological warfare designed to make Protestant minds crave Catholic beauty. They built architecture that literally overwhelms human psychology. They commissioned art that triggers involuntary religious emotions. They created ceremonies that bypass rational thought and directly manipulate spiritual feelings. Picture this calculated mind control. Every Protestant visitor entering Rome experiences psychological assault designed to make their own religion seem emotionally empty. St. Peter's Basilica that makes Protestant churches look spiritually inadequate. Sistine Chapel that demonstrates artistic sophistication Protestant culture can't match. Papal ceremonies that create religious experiences Protestant worship can't provide. This is cultural conquest through psychological superiority. What I'm about to show you is how the Catholic Church almost reversed the Protestant Reformation without fighting a single war. But more than that, how they proved that controlling emotions is more powerful than controlling territory. Here's what made the Vatican's mind control experiment so effective. Baroque architecture specifically designed to overwhelm human psychological defenses, ceiling paintings that force viewers to look upward, triggering unconscious feelings of divine transcendence, gold decoration that creates optical effects, making viewers feel surrounded by heavenly light, architectural proportions calculated to make humans feel appropriately small before divine authority, sound acoustics that amplify religious music to create emotional experiences impossible in Protestant churches. St. Peter's Basilica reaches completion as the ultimate psychological weapon. This isn't just the largest church in Christianity. It's designed as an emotional nuclear bomb. Protestant visitors enter expecting to see Catholic excess. Instead, they experience psychological transformation that makes their own religious traditions feel spiritually impoverished. Walk into a papal ceremony in 1652 and witness psychological manipulation techniques that modern advertising still tries to replicate. Theatrical lighting that creates divine atmosphere, impossible to achieve naturally. Costume design that makes papal authority appear supernaturally magnificent. Musical orchestration that triggers involuntary emotional responses in listeners. Choreographed movement that demonstrates religious coordination Protestant services lack. Every element calculated to make observers feel they're experiencing direct divine presence. The Vatican commissions art, specifically designed to psychologically convert Protestant minds. Bernini sculptures that make Protestant religious art look emotionally dead. Caravaggio paintings that demonstrate religious emotion Protestant art can't capture. Architectural details that reward careful observation, making viewers invest psychological attention in Catholic symbols. Each artwork functions as psychological conversion tool, disguised as aesthetic beauty. Here's something that terrified Protestant authorities. High-ranking Protestant visitors to Rome experiencing involuntary psychological conversion. Lutheran princes returning home, questioning whether Catholic religious experience might be superior. Calvinist theologians secretly doubting whether Protestant worship provides adequate spiritual satisfaction. English Protestant nobles developing psychological attraction to Catholic ceremonial magnificence. The Vatican creates religious tourism industry designed as mass psychological conversion system, pilgrimage routes that gradually escalate emotional intensity, preparing visitors for ultimate psychological transformation.
In nomine
Religious
Patris et Filii et
artifact
Spiritus
displays
Sancti.
that provide emotional experiences
vobiscum.
Protestant relics can't match. Sacred site visits that create feelings of historical connection to original Christianity.
This is a most
Tour
noble
guides
endeavor,
trained
gentlemen.
in psychological techniques
grace
that
in
make
this figure is
visitors
divine.
question
Thank you,
Protestant
Father.
alternatives. Tourism becomes religious recruitment through emotional manipulation. By 1655, the Vatican's psychological warfare shows measurable success. Protestant regions experiencing increased Catholic conversion rates. Protestant authorities implementing restrictions on Catholic travel because psychological conversion becomes epidemic. Protestant churches attempting to copy Catholic ceremonial elements to prevent membership losses. Vatican musical innovations create emotional experiences that psychologically undermine Protestant worship. Polyphonic compositions that make Protestant hymn singing seem musically primitive. Organ music that utilizes architectural acoustics to create supernatural sound effects. Choir techniques that produce emotional responses Protestant music can't achieve. Musical instruments that create sounds associated with heavenly rather than earthly experience. Protestant visitors hearing Vatican music often report that their home church music feels emotionally inadequate afterward. Vatican architects develop building techniques that manipulate human psychology through environmental design. Light management that makes sacred spaces feel supernaturally illuminated. Spatial proportions that trigger psychological feelings of transcendence and awe. Color combinations that create emotional responses associated with divine presence. Vatican artists' perfect techniques for triggering specific religious emotions. Facial expressions in religious paintings that make viewers feel spiritually understood. Body positions in sculptures that demonstrate religious devotion more intense than Protestant artistic models. Color usage that creates psychological associations with divine rather than human experience. Artistic narratives that make Catholic religious stories feel more emotionally compelling than Protestant alternatives. Every artistic choice designed to make Catholicism psychologically preferable to Protestantism. Papal ceremonies utilize psychological manipulation techniques centuries ahead of their time. Crowd psychology management that makes participants feel part of divine rather than human gathering. Sensory coordination that overwhelms individual resistance through simultaneous visual, auditory, and olfactory stimulation. Timing techniques that build emotional intensity to moments of psychological transformation. Vatican scholars develop intellectual arguments designed to create psychological doubt in Protestant minds. Theological sophistication that makes Protestant theology appear intellectually shallow. Historical documentation that demonstrates Catholic cultural achievements exceeding Protestant accomplishments. Philosophical arguments that address psychological needs. Protestant theology doesn't satisfy. Educational institutions that provide intellectual experiences Protestant universities can't match. Intellectual superiority becomes psychological weapon against Protestant confidence. Vatican diplomacy utilizes psychological techniques to influence Protestant political leaders. Papal audience ceremonies that make Protestant leaders feel psychologically subordinate despite political equality. Gift exchanges that demonstrate Catholic cultural sophistication exceeding Protestant court standards. Diplomatic protocols that reward psychological submission to Catholic authority. Vatican social techniques create peer pressure for Protestant conversion. Catholic social events that provide community experiences Protestant societies can't replicate. Religious social networks that offer psychological belonging Protestant communities lack. Social status systems that reward Catholic conversion with increased cultural prestige. Marriage opportunities that make Catholic conversion socially advantageous for Protestant families. Social psychology becomes conversion mechanism through community superiority demonstration. Vatican educational institutions provide learning experiences designed to psychologically undermine Protestant intellectual confidence. Universities that offer educational excellence Protestant institutions can't match.
This is a most noble endeavor,
Scholarly
gentlemen.
research that demonstrates Catholic intellectual achievements
Father.
exceeding Protestant accomplishments. Academic social networks that provide career advantages for Catholic conversion. Vatican cultural patronage creates artistic and intellectual superiority that psychologically undermines Protestant cultural confidence, literary achievements that make Protestant writing appear culturally primitive, scientific research that associates Catholic institutions with intellectual advancement, cultural festivals that demonstrate community celebration techniques Protestant cultures can't achieve, artistic innovation that makes Protestant aesthetic traditions appear emotionally limited. Cultural excellence becomes psychological weapon, demonstrating Catholic superiority over Protestant alternatives. By 1660, Vatican psychological warfare comes dangerously close to achieving Protestant reconversion. Multiple Protestant regions experiencing Catholic conversion epidemics. Protestant political leaders secretly considering Catholic conversion for psychological and cultural advantages. Protestant churches implementing desperate reforms, attempting to match Catholic emotional experiences. Here's something that's going to blow your mind about modern psychology. Every psychological manipulation technique used in contemporary advertising, political propaganda, and social media influence was perfected by Vatican Counter-Reformation psychologists. Emotional manipulation through environmental design, sensory overload techniques that bypass rational decision-making, social pressure systems that make alternative choices feel psychologically uncomfortable, authority demonstration through aesthetic superiority. Vatican invented modern psychological manipulation 370 years before modern psychology understood how it works. Vatican psychological techniques teach modern lessons about influence and persuasion. Environmental design affects psychological state more than rational arguments. Aesthetic superiority creates automatic authority that doesn't require logical justification. Emotional experiences influence decisions more than intellectual reasoning. Community belonging needs override individual logical preferences. Modern religious institutions still use psychological techniques the Vatican perfected. Megachurch architecture that utilizes environmental psychology to create spiritual experiences. Religious music that employs emotional manipulation techniques for conversion purposes. Ceremonial design that triggers psychological responses associated with divine presence. Community psychology that makes religious belonging feel psychologically necessary. Vatican psychological warfare techniques continue influencing contemporary religious experience. Vatican architectural psychology influences modern building design. Corporate headquarters that utilize environmental psychology to influence employee behavior. Retail architecture designed to manipulate consumer psychology through spatial and lighting techniques. Government buildings that demonstrate authority through psychological intimidation rather than logical argument. Vatican diplomatic psychology techniques influence modern political manipulation. Political ceremonies that utilize crowd psychology to create emotional rather than rational support. Political architecture that demonstrates authority through aesthetic superiority rather than democratic justification. Political communication that bypasses rational analysis through emotional manipulation techniques. Political social networks that create belonging psychology that overrides individual logical preferences. Vatican proved that psychological control creates more lasting political influence than military conquest. Vatican artistic psychology influences modern aesthetic manipulation. Advertising that utilizes emotional rather than rational persuasion techniques. Entertainment that creates psychological experiences designed to influence audience behavior. Social media that employs psychological manipulation to control user attention and decision-making. Vatican educational psychology influences modern learning manipulation. Educational institutions that utilize environmental psychology to influence student thinking. Academic social pressure that rewards conformity to institutional ideology rather than independent reasoning. Intellectual authority systems that discourage questioning through psychological rather than logical techniques. Educational community psychology that makes alternative thinking feel socially unacceptable. Vatican proved that controlling educational psychology controls long-term cultural development. Standing in Vatican City today, you can still experience the power of their psychological warfare techniques. Walk through St. Peter's Basilica and feel architectural psychology designed to overwhelm rational resistance. Tour the Sistine Chapel and experience artistic manipulation designed to trigger involuntary spiritual emotions. Observe papal ceremonies and witness psychological techniques designed to demonstrate supernatural authority. But in 1655, this wasn't religious tourism. This was proof that psychological manipulation creates more lasting control than military force, that emotional experiences override rational arguments, that aesthetic superiority generates voluntary submission more effectively than political coercion. Here's the ultimate truth about the Vatican's mind control experiment. They discovered that controlling what people feel is more powerful than controlling what people think. Protestant minds converted to Catholicism not because Catholic theology was logically superior, but because Catholic experience was emotionally irresistible. They proved that psychological manipulation through beauty, community, and emotional experience creates voluntary conversion more effectively than rational argument or military force. The Vatican's mind control experiment, that almost reconquered Europe, teaches the most important lesson about psychological influence. Human decisions are emotional rather than rational. Aesthetic experiences override logical arguments. Community belonging, needs defeat individual reasoning, and authority through beauty creates voluntary submission that lasts longer than authority through force. They came dangerously close to reversing the Protestant Reformation, not through military reconquest, but through psychological reconquest that made Protestantism feel emotionally inadequate compared to Catholic experience. The techniques that almost brought Protestant Europe back to Catholicism are still controlling human behavior through advertising, politics, education, and social media every single day. That's all for our journey through the Vatican's mind control experiment. But remember, every time contemporary institutions use environmental psychology to influence your emotions, aesthetic superiority to create authority, or community pressure to control your decisions, you're experiencing psychological manipulation techniques perfected by Counter-Reformation psychologists who almost reversed European religious history through pure mind control. If there's another moment when psychological warfare almost changed the course of human civilization, another institution that proved emotional control defeats rational resistance, let me know in the comments. Because the Vatican's lesson isn't about Catholicism or Protestantism. It's about the eternal truth that psychological manipulation through beauty and emotion controls human behavior more effectively than rational argument or physical force, that aesthetic superiority creates automatic authority, and that the most powerful conquest is the conquest of the heart that makes people grateful to surrender their independent thinking.